I feel like I'm in a, hello, hi. Oh, that feels brighter than normal. I feel like I'm going to assume that's me. I want to say welcome to all of you. It's so exciting to get to have some of you in this room tonight, getting to have our first time back since July 1st. We did have a time in this room, July 1st, where Eden did come together, but it's been since then. And so welcome, and to our online community, welcome to you as well. I'm going to start tonight off by just giving a couple of announcements. Eden Connect is going to be starting this week on the 20th at 6:30, so it's every Wednesday for the next 8 weeks. We'll be meeting here in this room. We're going to be studying Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Pete Scazzaro. There's plenty of time to sign up, so please go over. If you have not signed up yet, please go over and sign up, and we'll put you down on our list to expect you there. We have about 30 ladies already signed up. We're so excited. It's going to be really a rich, awesome time. And there's also plenty of time to go get the book. It is available down at his place bookstore downtown. They're matching Amazon's prices, so you don't have to worry about that. And he says he's got a nice stack there for us waiting. So feel free to go on down and get that. One little tidbit is please get chapter 1 read by the time we meet on Wednesday. Again, like I said, it's an 8-week study, so we're going to hit the ground running, and we'll start right in. And how that's going to look is we'll come in, we'll watch the video together as a group, and then we'll break up into small groups, probably about 4 or so small groups, and have a little discussion. And that, again, is every Wednesday, starting this Wednesday at 6:30. Next, a little bit of information is our Eden Gathering in February. We're so excited for, because in February, we always talk about sex here. And we're going to do it again this year. We're having our sex talks. It's going to be February 19th right here in this room at 6:30. Liz Kettlewell is coming back again, and our very own Amy Martella is going to be joining her. We're going to be talking about all things sex. I'm so excited about what they're working on and have planned for us to be learning. And by the way, that night we will have available to everybody who comes an envelope where you can write all kinds of questions, whether it's a question you come here with that night or it's a question that is spurred inside of you based on the conversation we have that night. And you can anonymously submit that question, and the very following week, we will be talking about the answers to those questions at Eden Speaks, which is our podcast. And speaking of Eden Speaks, don't forget that Eden Speaks puts out a podcast the second and the fourth Friday of every single month, so make sure you're tuning into that. You can find that anywhere you like to find your favorite podcast, so Spotify, a whole bunch of other places. Apple, anywhere you find your podcast. So you can find us there. That is it for announcements, and welcome. I'm going to invite up Katie, and she's going to introduce our speaker for tonight.
Thanks, Shannon. Hi, ladies. It's so good to see you all. I'm just going to kind of give you first like a run over of what tonight's going to look like, and then I'll talk about the speaker. But we're going to, when I'm done talking, we're going to watch a video of a good friend of mine. I'll tell you about her in a minute. When that concludes, the live stream will be done. So all of you online, we'll say goodbye to you at the end of the video. And the rest of you, if you don't already have a journal, we have some in the back. We're going to spend about 15 minutes together just contemplating and journaling. There will be a few prompts up on the screen for you to know what you're writing about. And we're just going to spend some time reflecting together. And then when that's done, we're going to have an open mic time if you feel like you want to share. So does that all sound good? And then we'll close out the night after that. So our speaker tonight, she is a great friend of mine, a wonderful woman. She's a pastor. And we go way back to when I was actually in high school, really long time. Back in Everett at the church where I grew up at. So she knew me in my young years and continued to stay friends with me and be close with me through my young adult years until she moved. I think I was around 25 or so when she moved. But she, when we really got kind of close, it was in my young adult years when I had just gotten married and was a pastor's wife and kind of just was trying to navigate what that looked like. And she was leading a small group, and it was through the book Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, which is fun because that's what we're doing together as a group. And she invited me into that small group. And I remember so many things about that group, but I think the most significant thing that I remember is that when you're a teenager growing up at a church and you stay there through your young adult years, there's this thing that happens where everyone kind of just assumes you're still that 16-year-old. And you know, you're trying to navigate adulthood now, but everyone still sees you as that child. And I remember her specifically choosing to get to know me as a 20-something and choosing to talk to me and get to know my marriage and get to know me as an adult. And that was so significant for me to have someone want to know me in that way. And she's an incredible woman, and her stories are incredible, the things that she's experienced. And currently she is pastoring, her husband and her co-pastor, a church in Battleground Foursquare, which is kind of off I-5 in South Washington area, if you don't know where that is. And she's incredible, and I'm really looking forward to what she has to share with us tonight. I hope that it speaks to you. And she's going to talk about grief, which I feel like is very relevant to our discussion this year about goodness disguised, right? So go ahead and tune in. Here she is.
Well, hello there, women of Oak Harbor. I'm really grateful to get the opportunity to spend this time with you, even if it's online. I have really held out to be able to actually meet you in person. But COVID has held out longer than I was willing to hold out. And so Katie and I, who've been looking for a date for me to come visit, we decided it was time for me to just do a recording. And it's really awesome that your women's group has continued even through the COVID season. I'm Elizabeth Sachek, as Katie said, and I have had a long-standing friendship with your pastors, Drew and Katie Barnhart. I, in fact, met Katie when she was in high school and I was a brand new mom. I've known them when they were dating, when they were married, and I can tell you that they stick with people. I mean, that's why we've been friends for so long. They love God, they love you, and they're loyal in their friendship, and you are really blessed to have them as your pastors. And it's January. January, man. Is anyone's favorite month January? I hope that you are able to find a comfy and warm spot for us to spend this time together. I got my coffee, and this is one of my favorite chairs because it fits me really, really well. And I hope that you have that space where you can settle in and we can chat a little bit about what it means to follow God in the season of winter. I don't know if anybody's favorite month is January. Maybe some birthday people out there, you like January. It feels like January loses all the twinkly lights and fun of December, but the days are still incredibly dark and cold. Right now, not cold enough, because the only good thing about January, in my opinion, is a good snow day. I love the magical way that the world looks under a blanket of snow. I love the limits to my normal push for busyness and productivity that a snow day brings. Winter is just not the season that you see visible growth outside. But I have learned that all kinds of important things happen under the ice and the snow and the darkness. In the natural world, seasons change kind of gradually. Summer gives way to fall and fall gives way to winter. But in real life, a season can actually change overnight. I wonder if you've experienced anything like that, where you just fall into winter. You might, for instance, be at a barbecue at the end of summer with friends and family from church, celebrating the good things that God has done in church over the summer. That was my experience. It was a summer moment of celebrating both the weather, the fact that we could even socially distanced be together outside, and the good things that God had done. And just a few hours later, I was bedside at a hospital because my husband had had a massive stroke. And I was telling him things that I wanted to make sure I said to him if I never got to speak to him again, because the doctor said he might not make it through the night. It didn't happen gradually. It happened suddenly. And any of you who've ever received a phone call from the hospital or gotten a letter that ends your job or been informed suddenly by a loved one that the relationship is over, you know what I'm talking about. You know that seasons can change suddenly and take your breath away. You can find yourself disoriented by cold and darkness and loneliness. In summer, when life is going great, it feels like everybody wants to come over and have a barbecue and be your friend. But sometimes when tragedy strikes, People start acting like your sorrow and bad times might be contagious, which compounds the isolation of a winter season. I love the fact that the Bible gives us just about every season and human experience that we'll ever have. And I have a personal love for the book of Job. It's not everybody's favorite book, and it can be hard to understand at the beginning. You can't take bits and pieces of it and try to interpret it by itself. But the book of Job tells us about the winter of the soul. Everything was going right for Job: business, family, leadership. He was definitely in summer. Everybody wanted a little bit of his time or attention. He was in demand. Bible says he was the richest man in the world of the time and very sought after for wisdom, had a huge, blessed family. But in one day, all of that changed. He fell into winter. And Job has to wrestle with life's most important questions. What do we do with our pain and our loss? Where's God when the night is dark and cold? You guys have been discussing this year in Eden the beautiful things that God brings out of difficult seasons and out of pain and darkness. They're great questions. And I want us to look at the book of Job today. I'm going to be reading from the Message because I feel like it helps us capture the narrative story element of Job. I want us to try to connect with him as a real person and get what this story is trying to tell us. Starting in verse 7. One day when the angels came to report to God, Satan, who was the designated accuser, came along with them. God said to Satan, "Have you noticed my friend Job? There's no one quite like him, honest and true to his word, totally devoted to God and hating evil." Satan retorted, "So do you think Job does all of that out of the sheer goodness of his heart? Why, no one ever had it so good. You pamper him like a pet. You make sure nothing bad ever happens to him or his family or his possessions. You bless everything he does. He can't lose. But what do you think would happen if you reached down and took away everything that is his? He'd curse you right to your face, that's what." God replied, "We'll see. Go ahead and do what you want with all that is his. Just don't hurt him." And then Satan left the presence of God. It's such an interesting story because it pulls back the curtain of heaven so we can see what's going on behind the scenes. Job, of course, does not have all this information. Here's what Job experiences earthside. In one day, Job owned lots and lots of different flocks and animals. That's actually where we get our word for stock. So it was literally the stock market of the day. And in one day, Job received reports of loss. First, he gets a message that random violence has annihilated his oxen, donkeys, and all the employees that cared for them, a major financial loss. And in the next couple minutes, he gets word that there's also been a natural disaster. Bolts of lightning struck his sheep and shepherds and killed them. And then finally, terrorism. The raiding Chaldeans, who were the terrorists of Job's time, massacred his camels and his employees, all on the same day. And finally, and by far the most devastating news, was that a house collapsed and killed all 10 of Job's children in one moment. The richest man in the world is reduced to total poverty, loses all his children, all his employees in one day. Can you imagine the headlines if that happened to Bill Gates tomorrow? Satan had also received permission from God to strike Job with wasting disease. His body is covered in boils. Scholars think this was probably a deteriorating skin disease like Hansen's disease, which of course is a terrifying and difficult disease to suffer from. Job was infected with worms, racked with fever and pain, so it made it really hard to sleep. And many of us know that any time that we have trouble with sleep, life is difficult, if it wasn't bad already. He was so disgusting in appearance that he scared people away and he had to move out of town. And I feel like this is the most difficult moment of this story. His own wife tells him that he has nothing left to live for. I think 10 funerals and a husband wasted with disease kind of snapped her mental capacities. And she tells Job he might as well kill himself. Can't imagine hearing that from someone who is supposed to be the person that loves you and encourages you. And so Job experienced just about every category of human suffering. I had an interesting experience reviewing this story this year because I was sort of putting it side by side with some of the things we've experienced in 2020. Now, I don't think anyone has quite had Job's intense experience on the same day, but we've had wasting disease. We've had violence on our doorsteps, certainly here in the cities of the West Coast. We've had all kinds of losses. And remember the fires, natural disasters? It's just seemed like one thing after another. So Job is suddenly in a winter of the soul without any kind of warning. He's enrolled in what I like to call the school of grief, and he didn't think he signed up. Have you ever found yourself there? If you haven't been there before, not many people make it through life without having this experience. So it's good for us to think about what grief does in our soul. Today we're going to consider what only grief can teach us. Grief is the teacher that nobody wants. At this point in my life, I believe that grief is actually one of our most important teachers, but nobody wants to take the class. I'm reminded of the experience I had with my oldest, my daughter. We moved her to Battleground where we passed her 3 years ago, and she was a 7th grader and she came kicking and screaming. Well, the next year when she was an 8th grader, I got a call from the school and they said that there was an opening in a magnet program that generally you couldn't get into. It was a magnet program for advanced kids and had very renowned teachers, specifically one of the teachers who was an 8th grade teacher named Mrs. Dowdy. And they said, would Katerina like this spot? And I said yes, without consulting my daughter. You can probably imagine what happened next. She was not having it. She was not interested in making another change. One of my relatives actually chatted with her and said, I don't know if she's going to forgive you if you make her move into the magnet program. So I did what good parents do, negotiated. A lot of parenting is negotiation, right? And I got Katerina, we sat down and I said, I would like you to try it for a month. And if you still don't like it after a month, we can consider moving you back. So she went ahead and tried it. She complained a lot in the first couple weeks, but the complaining really quickly tapered off. And when we got to a month, I asked her about moving back and she said it was too much trouble to move back. She never said it was good. She just said it was too much trouble to move back. But over the course of the next year, I heard her telling other people, not me, that being in Mrs. Dowdy's class was the best school experience she'd ever had, that Mrs. Dowdy was the best teacher that she'd ever had. Of course, she wasn't going to tell me that I was right, but she had this incredible experience. Her classes demanded a lot, but the results and the learning were remarkable. Grief is a little bit like Mrs. Dowdy was in our family. My kids, I've had 2 of them now in her class, they haven't wanted to push themselves that hard. They wouldn't choose to do the harder work, but in the end, they wouldn't change anything. Many destructive patterns in people's lives can be traced back to avoiding feeling pain or grief. It's a tough school, it's a tough teacher, but ironically, avoiding pain creates more pain and more coping mechanisms that can be destructive. I'm hoping that today we can listen to the wisdom the book of Job offers us about grief. You see, Job's losses are everybody's losses. There's a famous sermon from Jonathan Edwards where he commented that Job's losses of business, of health, of family are actually everybody's losses. Most of us will experience loss slowly over time, but at death, we will leave everything behind. Sometimes our losses are sudden and catastrophic, but we cannot avoid death and we cannot avoid loss if we're human. We can't escape dealing with grief. Our culture will teach us to live like we have no limits and no accountability, no need to deal with grief. But wisdom says we pay attention. Pete Scazzaro is one of my favorite writers and teachers, And I've heard from Katie that you guys are going to be going through emotionally healthy spirituality in the next season. And I just want to tell you, I've probably read that book 4 or 5 times, and each time I've gotten so much out of it. It's going to be great, and I just encourage you to sign up. Here's what Pete has to say about winter seasons. He uses the phrase hitting the wall, kind of like runners in a long race. For most of us, the wall appears through a crisis that turns our world upside down. It comes perhaps through a divorce, a job loss, the death of a close friend or family member, cancer diagnosis, a disillusioning church experience, a betrayal, a shattered dream, a wayward child, a car accident, an inability to get pregnant, a deep desire to marry that remains unfulfilled, or a dryness or loss of joy in our relationship with God. We question ourselves, God, the church. We discover for the first time that our faith does not appear to work. We have more questions than answers as the very foundation of our faith feels like it's on the line. We don't know where God is, what he's doing, where he's going, or how he's getting us there, or when this will be over. I ran into an acquaintance in the grocery store a couple days ago, found out that their family also has been going through major medical difficulties. I cannot tell you as a pastor how many people I've been talking with who are struggling with marriage issues, depression and anxiety, medical issues. The stress of 2020 has been matched by personal things coming to the surface. And there's times I just want to get away from it. But what if God has brought us to this moment so he can bring things to the surface that he wants to wrestle with us about? He wants to deal with. He wants to bring greater healing and freedom. That's what happens in winter or at the wall. We don't get to choose to avoid it, but we do get one choice. We decide what we're going to do with loss and grief. Will we learn the lessons that only grief can teach us? Or will we bury our pain, run from our grief, and create more problems for ourselves and people around us? I want to learn. And grief teaches us about limits. Job learned the limits of money, power, and even his body. Grief teaches us the limits of our mortality. We realize our time is limited. One thing that stands out in my mind from the night of my husband Rick's stroke, I was in the emergency room, and the doctor told me that Rick's condition was critical, that there was no guarantee that he would make it through the night. And I suddenly had this sort of out-of-body experience. I know that some of you have been in similar situations. I felt like I was watching the scene unfolding like on television or from some space outside of time. I believed that Rick would make it through the night, but it hit me hard one way or another. This is what it means to be human. Someday I'm going to have to say goodbye to those that I love the most. And then our fights, our disagreements, yes, we have those. They flashed before my eyes, and it felt so incredibly inconsequential in comparison to a lifetime of loving each other. So grief also shows us the limits of our capabilities. My husband's always been just probably the most energetic person I know, someone that can work 18 hours a day and jump up and stay up late and all those things. And that's not the way it is right now. He's dealing with neurofatigue. He has to have naps during the day. The fact that he needs rest will come out in all kinds of different ways because his brain's healing from this massive stroke that he had. What that also means is my limits, my capabilities are also coming out. I've tried to cover all the extra with our kids, with our church, with our business, and I can't do it all. We've had to accept help from so many other people. Probably some of you that are listening to this have probably done things that have helped me, and I'm so incredibly, incredibly humbled and grateful. I've also had to learn how to say no. Our family doesn't have the capacity to do that right now, and we've never been good at saying no. We've been good at saying yes. Yes, we can do that. We can do more. But we've had to get in touch with the limits of our capabilities. And all of this has made me wonder, why was it so hard for me to receive help before? Why was it so hard for me to say, I'm not very good at that. Could you help me? I've discovered that it's painfully humbling to let people help me, but it's also beautiful and teaches me about what it means to live in community. Grief does this. It teaches us the limits of our capabilities. Grief also teaches us that our options are limited. I think I was one of those kids that was, raised of the generation of participation trophies and being told that we can do anything and be anything. And that's really not the truth. We all have limits based on our marital status, based on our health, based on our financial situation. We live with limits. The world is not our oyster. And we can either be like a child having a temper tantrum. I know I have felt like I don't want to be limited by my husband's fragile physical condition. I want everything to be the way it was. But I can stay in that anger, that temper tantrum, or else I can learn to meet God in reality, in my limits, right here and right now. And grief offers us the opportunity to see that our options are limited. Grief also teaches us about honesty. Job's friends give him some of the most spectacularly bad advice in all of Scripture. In fact, if you have been around church and you have experienced something like a divorce or a really difficult illness or bankruptcy, you might have heard some of these spiritual platitudes from religious people that you must have sin in your life, you need to figure that out, or other things that blame you for the sorrow that you are experiencing. And I'm so sorry. It's not the way community is supposed to work, and it's not the truth of Scripture. But I love that you find it all right here in the book of Job. It's not new. And grief teaches us what it means to be honest, to move beyond those kind of platitudes. Teaches us that there's no explanation for suffering. Hear this from the book of Job, chapter 23, verses 3 and 17. If only I knew where to find God. Darkness is all around me, thick, impenetrable darkness. Do you love that God actually gives us words to say, I don't have any answers and I don't understand? Suffering lets me know also that the world does not revolve around me. It teaches us to express those big emotions to God. Here's another scripture from Job that I just love. Let me speak to God, and I will face the consequences. Yes, I will take my life into my hands and say what I really think. That's from Job 13 and 14. Many people are willing to tell others about their frustration with life and with God, but we don't want to engage God directly. Job is bold. I'll take my life into my hands. I'll tell God what I really think, no matter what the consequences are. I love that. I love that God invites us to that kind of honesty, that he can handle our biggest emotions. This has been another huge learning for me in this season. I took my first days away since my husband's stroke just in this last week. I went to the beach with another friend who also needed time just to be quiet and be with God. And I spent quite a bit of time outside, even in the rain. The great thing about that is it's noisy and it's wet, so nobody cares how hard you're crying. And in that space, I was able to cry in a way that I've probably needed to for a long time. I mean, sobbing before God. Letting him know that I don't want to walk the path that I'm on right now. It's been really, really difficult. It's been hard not to have that emotional support from my husband, who's been so good to me over the last 20 years. And he doesn't have the capacity to hold all of my emotions right now. And so I've had to learn in a new way that God has the capacity to hold those emotions. And I recognize that some of you, you've never had a spouse that can hold your emotions. Maybe your spouse is just not emotionally available. Maybe you're single. Maybe you're divorced, or you're a widow. For whatever reason, we will come to times when we have to take those big emotions to God. My dear friend Evie taught me this, and it's just a practical thing about grief. Let the tears fall all the way down your face. If you're like me, you're probably quick to do this when you start to cry, even when you're by yourself. I'm quick to want to keep those feelings inside because it feels like messier and more than I can deal with. And God invites us to let the tears fall down our face. Why? Some people say, what good does it do? Those tears are honesty. If we bring them before God, they're prayers. And they're inviting God into the reality of our grief and our loss. And it matters that we would take the time to bring that emotion, that real and raw emotion before God. Because grief teaches us about how to be honest, about how not to sugarcoat our situation, but bring that before God. And finally, grief teaches us about God. Chapter 38, verse 1 says, "And now finally God answered Job from the eye of a violent storm." And unless you've read the 38 chapters of Job, it's hard to even appreciate how it's finally, because these friends have been talking for so long. Frederick Buechner comments, "It is the most gorgeous speech that God makes in the entire Old Testament. And it's composed entirely of the most gorgeous and preposterous questions. Who keeps the sea in its boundaries? Have you commanded the morning to appear? Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Can you direct the movement of the stars?" What's the point of these obviously impossible, they seem kind of rhetorical, these questions? The point's this: grief helps us to right-size ourselves. Maybe it's because I'm the oldest child. I don't really know, but I've had a tendency to see myself as the center of the universe. I used to actually imagine, and this is so embarrassing to put on camera, I used to kind of imagine that I was the star of some sort of reality TV show. It was like this drama, and I would narrate for myself throughout the day. She does this, she does that. That's how strong my inner tendency to think that I'm at the center is. And I think it's only grief that can teach us to right-size ourselves. I am not the hero of my own story. God is the hero of my own story. He's at the center. I'm not big. God is big. And grief gives me the freedom of humility, the freedom to know it doesn't all depend on me and on what I do. It depends on God. And I'm living His story, and He's going to meet me right in the middle of it. In the middle of a day when Rick was not able to communicate with me in any kind of a normal way, I was sitting by his bed and holding his hand. And again, a big emotion hit, and that emotion was this: if Rick can never contribute to the bottom line of our family again, I still love him with all my heart. I don't want him just because he helps me with the kids, or because of his productivity, or because of his paycheck. Even if none of those things ever happen again, I just want more time with him because I love who he is as a person. With that was a corollary discovery that was really important for me. I know Rick loves me more than I've ever deserved, and he certainly loves me unconditionally. And so that means that I too am loved no matter what I do or don't do, or what I bring of productivity or what I don't bring. None of us are as important as we tend to think. Our to-do list can stop tomorrow and the world will keep on turning. We are just not that important, but we are eternally and incredibly loved. You are eternally and incredibly loved. Grief teaches us something else. Shows us that God is bigger than we've ever imagined. This is Job 42 that I'm going to read to you. I'm convinced you can do anything and everything, God. Nothing and no one can upset your plans. You told me, listen, let me do the talking. Let me ask the questions. You give the answers. I admit that I once lived by rumors of you. Now I have it all firsthand for my own eyes and ears. There are very few satisfying answers about why bad things happen at any given time. I know that Rick has been racking his brain to find the good in enduring this really difficult stroke. God doesn't answer all the questions, but he gives us himself in real time, right in the middle of our suffering. We always meet God in the present tense of our real life. And why he may not give us every answer, his presence will be enough. I once lived by rumors of you. Now I have it all firsthand. You are seen, you are known, and you are loved. So what are the gifts of grief as we wrap up today? Job learned to appreciate mystery. He didn't have all the answers. Job learned incredible humility and forgiveness as he prayed for the friends that gave him such bad advice. God restored to him his fortune, his family. But I think if you asked Job, none of those things would be as important as the gift of meeting God in the middle of his darkness. Job gives us one of the most incredible verses in the entire Bible, and that is 19:25. As for me, I know my Redeemer lives, and he will stand upon the earth at last. I will see him for myself. I will see him with my own eyes. I am overwhelmed at the thought. Jesus is the Redeemer that meets us right in the midst of our suffering. Even more than Job, he's experienced every category of suffering that you and I will face. So we will never have to go through it alone. He's the Redeemer to go through it alone, that we meet in the middle of the darkness. As we close, I want to give you an invitation. If you're willing, and if you're in a place where you can do it, would you hold your hands out in front of you? And would you picture some of your real losses from this last year, your mini deaths? Picture perhaps it's been a relationship that's ended, a job or business loss. Perhaps you've been dealing with loss as far as your physical capabilities go, or with children, or with your spouse. Would you picture holding that right before you? And now I want you to picture that that loss is an old-fashioned invitation on the heaviest paper. It's embossed like a wedding invitation, and it's from God to you. Because I truly believe that every loss is an invitation to meet God in the darkness, in the grief. Jesus put it this way: blessed are those that mourn, for they will be comforted. But it doesn't say, blessed are those that stuff or deny, or blessed are those who distract themselves. It says, blessed are those who mourn. And so you are holding a really important invitation. Will you do the hard work, feeling the feelings, allowing the grief, and meeting God? Because when you meet your Redeemer in the suffering, it always ends with resurrection. But in order to experience resurrection, we have to acknowledge the real deaths in our life. Jesus went through it, and he emerged on the other side with new life, with resurrection. And I believe he's going to bring that into each and every person's life that's listening and praying with me right now. I believe that people in your community of Oak Harbor, in my community, they want more than little platitudes like when God closes a door, he opens a window. They want to know that God will take their pain and their questions seriously, that the church has room for it, and that they can meet God in suffering. Because this is a year where no one's been able to deny that life is difficult. So let's be people that are deep enough to meet God in the midst of grief and experience his resurrection. Can I pray? God, I pray for my friends, my sisters. I pray that you would invite them to meet you in grief. And Lord, I pray that they would experience the truth that you can never outgrieve God's comfort. I want to say that again. You can never outgrieve God's comfort. That you would meet them and they would experience more of you as they open up to you in this unusual way. Thank you, Lord, for meeting us in our grief. Thank you for handling our emotions. In Jesus' name, amen.